Well, welcome everyone. You want to grab your seats. We've got an hour, and so we're going to try to do it as quickly as we can, but be able to get you as much information as we can as well. So today, the reason for this event that we're putting on is, a lot of questions have come up about 2023. Of my many years in the business, I think I've been asked more than any other of what are we expecting for 2023? What's the market going to be like? A lot of questions tied in with it. So I want to give an example. Here's a video that shows similar of conversations we've been having with clients.
This is Tyler with Allied Commercial. By now, a lot of people have been hearing about the economy and slowing down. This usually brings up some pretty interesting conversations that we've had with clients and prospects.
Why are interest rates increasing? The market is completely falling apart, and that's not good.
Listen, Gilbert, inflation is going to happen and it's trying to even out the market. But overall in commercial real estate, we're still doing well. Some businesses are leasing instead of buying. But overall, the activity we've had is still strong, especially in Northeast Indiana.
I despise banks. Tell me this, wise guy, will interest rates ever come down?
Of course they'll come down. In fact, what the projections are is next year, it's going to see some increase at the beginning, and then it's going to even out at the end. I mean, there's always going to be a shift in the market and to finally improve over time. Just wait to see what 2023 and ahead looks like. I think we're going to see some positivity still all around. Well, we're experts at the intricate market that we're going to see in 2023. We have some interesting and funny clients to work with, but we're excited to help you on any of your commercial real estate needs for 2023. Thank you.
So a lot more of our clients are pessimistic, are not as pessimistic as Gilbert Godfrey's son in that video, but no, we wanted to give you just kind of a little bit of a sequence of some questions that have been popped up for us here and there. So of that pessimistic of inflation, interest rates, recession, and what's going on, we wanted to kind of break it down. And one of the biggest effects on that in commercial real estate and how commercial real estate really comes together is the economy and what you see in the market of what that wave is at that time. Community and market, and when I say that, it's the area that it's based in, what kind of activity you're seeing in that surrounding, what kind of development, what's happening with the rates, what's happening with the cost, construction costs and where that's running, how many developments are happening, is construction on hold, is construction growing, and then the big one is finance, and how are banks doing, are they being our friend, are they helping us out, are rates in a good spot? And so with that, I wanted to get an expert together from each one of those categories that can share with us today a little bit on commercial real estate and what we're going to be expecting here in 2023. So with us today, excited to say Dr. Joshua Long, Professor of Economics and Business at Indiana Tech University right here. Ellen Cutter, Chief Economic Development Officer, Greater Fort Wayne, Inc. Bill Kinder, CEO, Michael Kinder & Sons, and Will Thatcher, CEO of Community State Bank. So the first topic that we're going to go into is key trends. We want to talk about what did we see in 2022 as we compare that going into 2023. Based on your industry expertise, what are some of the key trends, demands that you saw? Let's lead off with Josh.
So first of all, welcome to Indiana Tech. It's great to see everyone here. When Tyler asked me to make a few comments, I was trying to figure out how to kind of temper some of the news a little bit. It's bad news is easier to see than good news a lot of times. So I figured I'd try to balance this out a bit. So just a couple of comments, maybe starting off with the national scene a little bit. I think Ellen and some of the other speakers have some data about the more regional economy, but as many of you probably know, the labor force took a massive hit during the pandemic and that very short recession that we had in 2020. overall, we lost about 8 million workers, just out of the pot of available workers in the civilian labor force. About a year or two ago, I was looking at some of the trends, and if you take a look at the number of workers who are available, there's just so you kind of have general, growth over, decades, and all of a sudden we have a massive, massive collapse. Some of the good news is that we're actually, as of last month, the size of the labor force is back to where it was right before the pandemic. So some moderately good news there. If we look over a period of time, we don't have the actual number of workers that we would have had, but again, at least we've kind of regained some of that ground. So perhaps that could help to kind of temper some of the wage pressures that we've been seeing across many, many different sectors. So I guess, workers are back. At the same time, unemployment rates, stay pretty low. That's probably why we keep on seeing help wanted signs, across, numerous sectors. I'll make some other comments maybe about the labor force moving forward. Inflation is one of the major factors that we've been seeing in the economy, especially over the last year, especially in my lifetime. Normally inflation at least for consumers, sits at about 2 to 3% a year, and last year we saw inflation somewhere in the range of 9%. Some better news as we start off 2023. For consumers, inflation sits at about 7.1%. Not a good number, but better than it was. Some of the really hot sectors for inflation for consumers, food. Have any of you gone and checked out the price of eggs the last week or so? Yeah, I about had a heart attack when I went and bought a dozen eggs a couple days ago. It's like, I think there's an extra 3 on the front of it. No. So energy continues to be extremely hot, especially fuel oil. My parents have a farm in Michigan, and they actually use fuel oil to heat their home. They don't have natural gas or propane. That cost is just absolutely sky high. And then also transportation. Those costs can continue to be very high. On the producer side, food and energy are so for businesses and producers, those are the 2 really hot areas right there. The last comment that I'll make as we start off, I think all of us know that interest rates have gone up primarily because the Federal Reserve has increased some of their key interest rates, the federal funds rate, which obviously doesn't directly impact any of us. But again, as you take a look at some other key interest rates, or perhaps in the banking sector, interest rates across the board have increased. I'll make some more comments about that looking into the rest of the year.
Anyone else have some stuff to share?
Add some local flavor. Good morning. When we see kind of the activity on the ground at Greater Fort Wayne Inc. and the businesses that are making inquiries, wanting to learn about the opportunities to invest and grow in Allen County, there's some things that we have observed over the last year that I think will continue into the next year. First, 2022 was a record year for our average wage in terms of the quality of jobs that we saw in our businesses that were choosing to invest and grow in Allen County. So that's very exciting in terms of the quality of the jobs and the investments that we're seeing here. 2020, so taking it back during the pandemic, that was actually a record year in terms of the number of business attractions into market from elsewhere across the country. That surprises a lot of people just because of the doom and gloom of 2020. But businesses, as they were changing their plans, shifting their business strategies, Fort Wayne won in many regards. We're seeing a big push towards sustainability. I'm sure you're seeing that as well. We had a great company come to market where Scott Naltner, my colleague, worked on this project, a great company, Do Good Foods. They take food waste from grocers, restaurants, from a huge catchment area and turn that into animal feed, providing about, I think, 100 or so high-wage jobs there. And then, you see what the utilities are doing, automakers trying to cut emissions. That's getting pushed down throughout supply chains. So we're just seeing vastly different inquiries in terms of building requirements, site size, utility loads required for projects and for businesses looking to invest in the community. There's a lot of activity that I think we'll see actually start hitting the ground in 2023 related to infrastructure and commercial construction projects related to the federal funds that were made available from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, and then the Federal Infrastructure Package, which goes by two names, the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BILL. So BILL is a 4 to 5 year program, and we saw the first awards made this past year, and so you're going to see those dollars start to hit the street. ARPA, local governments, communities got allocations. You've already seen City of Fort Wayne has made grants to nonprofits and small businesses. Those local entities are allowed to use some of those funds for infrastructure investments as well.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the items that we can't lose sight of is the fact of where we're starting off right now as we're heading into what the Federal Reserve is trying to create a scarcity of supply, right? They're trying to get our supply pushed down to meet demand, and to do that, demand has to be reduced. Supply has to keep elevating. So rising interest rates, those types of items are desired to try and drive down demand. Well, inside of Fort Wayne, we're starting off at high occupancy rates, strong property values, high unemployment, and so we're at when you compare our real estate occupancy rates compared to the larger, more urban areas, we have a significantly better position where we're jumping off at as we're heading into this next 12 to 18 months than most of our larger cities in terms of competing against them. In addition to what we're hearing from our prior two speakers, we're having money flushed right into our community too that's going to keep pushing more development. And we're going to come at this point where the federal government is pushing us to slow, and we have all this cash coming in also, I should say Federal Reserve pushing us to slow, and the federal government and the state governments are pushing us money to continue to grow. There's going to come a moment here in 2023 when those things are going to come to a head, because there's a blunt instrument that the monetary policy of the United States is using, which is we're going to keep rising rates until inflation is moderated. And we have money coming in that we're being earmarked to spend. I don't know when that moment of inflection is going to come, but it's going to come. And that's probably where, from the banking perspective, we're trying to guess where that inflection point is going to be. What month is it going to be? Which year is it going to be? Because it's a unique battle that we're watching. I'm sure economists are looking at it. I'm sure all of you are wondering where it's going to head yourselves. But in terms of a bank, we're trying to, how do we handle that risk? That is the blunt instrument of the Federal Reserve and the cash that's causing a contradictory outcome that the federal government's spending. And it's a challenge for us right now. But in Fort Wayne, Greater Fort Wayne, Northeast Indiana, Northwest Ohio, we're starting off at a point where strong occupancy rates, good loan to values against our projects, we're really in a good spot to try and battle this at this point right now. We're in a really good spot.
To add to that, what they all said here, material and supply chain has been huge. We have to deal with the issues that he's talking about. So first off, you have the interest rates, and then you got the material costs. Material cost on a project went up as much as 30%. It'd go up and down, kind of fluctuate. We still don't know exactly where that's going into this year. It's leveled out a bit, so that's good. There's concrete shortages we had to deal with the last 2 quarters of 2022. Where that goes going into 2023, we don't know. Material-wise, getting material. I mean, can I get a rooftop unit if I'm building a building for somebody? That may take 18 months. AEP told me the other day it takes me 12 months just to get a transformer. So if we can build the building in 6 months, I can't get the transformer for 12. That's a problem. So there's a lot of things that, with the supply demand and what Will said here, is a big issue. But for our construction, I know Josh talked a little bit about the eggs. It's probably a good thing that the eggs went up in price, because that's one thing we're doing a lot of that work for our egg partners in Texas, here in Indiana, and Wabash, Indiana, probably $100 million worth of work just building plants for them. So that's actually worked out okay for us.
Well, that's good. In commercial real estate brokerage, and it was quite interesting. Low interest rates led to lower cap rates. There was a lot of investors who were getting into commercial real estate because of the stock market and how that was fluctuating. And so dove in, we had so much more of a demand and interest in investing into commercial real estate. The one that I was the most surprised with was retail and how much occupancy we now have. It had been interesting over time. E-commerce had fueled a lot of retail to, be able to clear out, and having a lot of vacancies with it because people were buying online instead of at the stores. But the transition has led to a lot more service-based. Us in Fort Wayne, we eat out at restaurants a lot, and we have more restaurants in Fort Wayne per capita than in Indy and Chicago. It's a hot spot. So restaurants are big. Entertainment service such as nail salon, hair salon has been filling it. So overall, retail did very well. Multifamily, more and more of those are getting developed. And industrial hit a low based on study I'll share later. 3.6% is what vacancy rate was. So overall, it was a really good year in commercial real estate brokerage and management. Here's kind of an example shared just where Fort Wayne is. Most promising places to invest in real estate in the United States, and Fort Wayne got number one because of the activity that we had. As you can tell, most of them are Midwest-based. That's become the center. East Coast, West Coast have the cap rates have just gone down so much. They're still at a position of more attractive investments. So something to look into, but that was some good research we found on Fort Wayne, top of the list. What we're now going to get into is financing, bank financing, what has transpired over the last 6 months and what is expected for 2023. Let's lead that off with Will. Share us a little bit about what you saw last 6 months and what you're thinking ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Would you mind putting the first slide up for me?
Yep.
So this probably looks very familiar to anybody who has borrowed money in the last 12 months. And this is the stepping up of the Fed funds rate. So we were here in January of 22, and then by the end of the year, we're all the way up to 4.5. To give you some concept of what banking industry was planning on is the Federal Reserve said, we're going to probably forecast an increase of 50 basis points from January of 22 all the way through December. That is what they forecasted a year ago. We ended up going up 4.25%. So it's a dramatic change, but then on top of that, it's caused 3 fallout items that are happening in our industry right now. The first is, and it's probably no surprise to anybody here, there's a liquidity crunch in banking. There is not as much cash available to lend as there was a year ago. There just is. There's less cash. Anybody who's in the banking industry knows right now they're asking you to find, and where's my team at? Deposits. Go find deposits. That is more important than loans right now inside of banking. So I want to make sure all of you investors understand that. It's more important for banks to have deposits right now than it is to have long-term loans. And you'll see why in a second when I show that. So that liquidity crunch is there. Secondly, banks have alternative methods of investing now that can drive a return that's acceptable. When Fed funds gets to 4.5%, rather than 1/4%, we now can go invest in mutual bonds, AAA quality, taxable, tax exempt, that drive a strong return with no risk. Unlike lending in general has at least some measure of risk. So we can get a good return in an alternative investment right now. So you have a liquidity crunch and things in which you can invest in alternatively. So might you move to the next slide for me?
Yep.
So then here's the next slide that creates some problems for banks. And that is, this right now is a FOMC dot plot map. I don't know if many have heard of this, but there's, I think it's 13 governors inside the Federal Reserve, and each one of them every quarter give an estimate of where they think Fed funds is going to be for a certain target. I apologize in advance if this is incredibly complicated, but I'll do my best to explain it. Those who know me know I have no problem talking, so I apologize to all of you in advance. So here we are. So the dot map at the end of the year was right around 4.5, which is our Fed funds rate right now. By the end of 23, it's forecasted to go to roughly 5.25. So that means prime is going to be 8.25 is what the governors are all pretty much uniformly saying. Every little dot is one of the governors. So the vast majority of the governors are saying we're going to be at 5.25, and you have a couple up there at 5.75. So that means prime is going to be between 8.25 and 8.75 sometime at the end of the year in 23. But look at the decline of it over the years coming. in 24, 25, and even longer. It shows it's going to be dropping in 24 to roughly 4.25. 25, they expect it to be at 3.25, and down the Fed funds at the end of 25 and going forward, it's going to be around 2.5. So the days of having free cash, the Federal Reserve is saying, is gone. You're not going to see prime at 3.25 again. So that's the first thing to think about if you're a developer is don't plan on having cheap 3-4% financing. They're saying that's never coming back in the long term. They don't want to ever get back to that world again. It came to us because of catastrophes that happened around us, but they never want to go back there again. So the lowest they're forecasting is being at 5.5. So if you're going to use some cost of money going forward, imagine no less than 5.5%. Does that make sense to everybody? That's what they're telling us. So if you're a bank, you've got these sharp increases that have happened from 22 all the way through 23, and then a sharp decline. The cost curve that's happening in our industry mirrors this. So it's cheaper to borrow right now for 5 years than it is to borrow for 18 months. That inverted yield curve leads us to believe that a recession's on its way. Except the issue is, I shouldn't say except, but in addition, that difference between the yield curve in the short term and the long term is as big as it's ever been. Usually it's 50 basis points. We're talking almost 200. That shows the uncertainty of the market. You'll find banks are careful about how long they're going to start committing loans to. If you even try to be a depositor for a CD right now, you would notice that you can get a great 1-year CD rate and a pretty poor 3-year CD rate because we don't know where rates are heading in an industry. So when it's going to come time to lending money, it's that same uncertainty as present. It's going to be very challenging to try and get a bank to say, I'm going to do a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year fixed rate right now. That's going to be anywhere, I should say in the 6-7% range. They're going to be saying it's going to be up and down there. You're not going to have any consistency between banks. We're going to push you to more swap products, more off-balance sheet derivative products, where a third party is going to carry that risk rather than the bank. Does that make sense to everybody? Uncertainty in rates causes banks to try and push that risk in a different direction. It can be through a derivative or a swap, which is going to be something off balance sheet. Some other provider is going to hold it. Or we're just going to give you a shorter commitment until we get more clarity around where long-term rates are going to go. So furthermore, this increase is telling us a recession's coming, right? That inverted yield curve we talked about, a recession's coming. That's the third risk we're going to talk about. Banks' traditional playbooks in recessions are going to say, for real estate, don't do any speculative lending, don't do where there's a lot of vacancy, try and make it where there's a lot of pre-lease up. Land development loans for building expansion for residential properties are typically ones you shy away from. But as I mentioned earlier, we're in a better jump-off point than other areas in the country are, and frankly, better jump-off point going into a recession than any time in my lifetime of doing this for over 30-some years. So banks are caught in this risk dynamic of saying, we're heading into a recession, but boy, we look really good. We look really good. So if you can find a way to strip the speculative income out of the project, you're going to find it's going to keep moving forward because our vacancy rates are so low, and the property values, to what Tyler said, are still strong in Fort Wayne area, Northeast Indiana, Northwest Ohio. But when it gets to the rate component of it, you're going to find people are shying away because the profit model isn't certain for years, 26 and beyond. 3 years from now, we just don't know what it's going to look like. All right, thank you.
Anyone else have to share? Bill, I know that, with finance and what has been going on, that's had a little bit of shift in construction. Do you have anything to elaborate on?
Yeah, I think it's basically, just the private sector. We've seen it. We've seen people put a hold on projects in that sector where they're relying on a bank loan, a commercial loan from a bank. A lot of what we see now is whether there's other monies out there, whether it be federally or from the state, that you can get tax credits and such, that those projects keep moving forward, and there's more money to come in those sectors. So that's going to help overall on the commercial side of things where, the industrial and projects that similar to that, where it's not a private bank that's financing it.
Yeah, briefly, just to tack on what Bill and Will both explained, the state of Indiana has been very aggressive and very forward-looking in addressing the linkage between quality of place and population and labor force growth, and programs like the READY program, which recently brought $50 million to Northeast Indiana for gap financing, has really been a buoy in the midst of all the dynamics that Will just explained. The governor does have in his proposed budget additional funding for READY 2.0, and we'd love to see that happen. We'll see what the legislature does with that proposal. The governor has also proposed a deal closing fund, which would help, to Bill's point, just help get projects across the finish line.
Go ahead, Josh.
Just briefly about the chart here. As my colleague mentioned, there are various projections that the Board of Governors, and actually it's the FOMC in this case, that they're making. One of the things that I would point out is the spread of those dots. So for example, for 2023, all the dots are kind of hanging out together towards the top there. So we have, the various members of the FOMC, the policymakers at the Fed, it appears that they have a bit of consensus as to where interest rates will go this year. 24 and 25. Take a look at the divergence. That's where things get colorful, and that's where the uncertainty comes in. Just to make this a little more interesting, think back 40 years ago. Some of us weren't alive 40 years ago. But the last time this happened, when inflation got up, towards that 10% mark, and interest rates went up, well, we all know what the side effect was. We had a double-dip recession, 80, 81, 82. The question is, are we heading back in that direction? We don't know yet. They don't know yet. And then also to add one more interesting little twist, shocks. No one had any idea that COVID would cause as many unknown variables to pop up. We just don't know, and quite frankly, given that spread, they don't know. So, which makes it all the more colorful moving forward.
Thank you. Next topic is labor and supply chain, both of which we've seen some fluctuation and both of which have a big effect on the economy and commercial real estate market. How has this affected the area, construction, economic realm? What changes have had to be made with construction and business progressing because of this? Ellen, let's lead off on that. I know that with your work, labor and workforce is your big project and what you spend a lot of time on. Can you expand on this a little bit?
Sure, thank you. Just to echo what Will was saying earlier in terms of just our strong position in the midst of everything that's going on nationally. 2021 was the slowest year on record for national population growth. Our country's pretty old now, so that's significant, right? Slowest growth on record last year. Country grew by 0.1%, adding fewer than 400,000 people in a single year. It was the first time since the 1930s the U.S. added fewer than 1 million people in a single year. So that was significant. In the midst of that, Allen County grew by about 0.6%. And we were the fastest growing metro in the Great Lakes region. So we do not have the local numbers yet. We won't have the local numbers until March, but the state and the national numbers came out in December, and population growth nationally is rebounding, which is positive. National population growth for 2022 is at 0.4%. We added 1.25 million people in 2022. In Indiana, the growth was just slightly slower, 0.3%, adding over 20,000 people. Now, a big change that we saw on the state level in 2022 is the impact of international immigration. So this is something that I know as a community we're really trying to get our arms around, just making sure that as nonprofit partners like Catholic Charities, Lutheran Charities, continue to welcome Burmese refugees and others, that we have workforce development programs and legal resources to make sure folks have the documentation and the skills necessary to enter the workforce. I think one of the great assets that we have in the community is our higher education partners. We are one of the few communities that have a high number of great private colleges and universities, as well as 2 internationally known brands in Purdue Fort Wayne and IU Fort Wayne here in our community. When you look at retention rates, 75% of graduates from our higher ed institutions stay within Northeast Indiana after they graduate. So when we talk about population growth, we talk about the retirements that are coming with we've all heard the term silver tsunami, right? We need to make sure that we're replacing those folks that are retiring. So supporting efforts to expand student housing at PFW and IUFW. Indiana Tech, I think, has been a strong leader. Indiana Tech has their Northeast Indiana Center for Engineering and is rolling out about a dozen certificate programs in advanced manufacturing and skilled trades. So I think in a market of our size, we're nimble enough and have the relationships to be able to respond to those market pressures. But bottom line, Fort Wayne is in a growth position. We'll see what our numbers look like in March.
Thank you. Bill, do you want to talk a little bit? I know supply chain has been a big effect on construction in particular. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, before that, just to talk a little bit about labor. I'm skilled trade labor and subcontractors. That's probably what I lose the most sleep on at night, because obviously if we don't have the skill out there, we don't have the quality out there. So we spend a lot more time managing that process and making sure that people are getting what they deserve on the project. So monitoring the quality is absolutely critical these days. So with that, with labor, we've got a lot of new trade schools actually starting back up in these high schools and such, which we've partnered with. And we got to continue that, because obviously the older generation of the skilled trade are slowly but surely retiring. So that's been a big issue. Supply chain, obviously I talked a little bit about that earlier. It's kind of up and down. We got a lot better handle on it today than we did last year, all year. But again, it still fluctuates. We're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. We got a plan, we got idea, but everything is much longer. It takes much longer to get it. So with those two things, with the skilled labor being short, with the supply chain requiring a longer schedule, you got a interest rate that's higher, and you got a project that takes longer. If the project takes longer to do, it's going to cost you more. With that, you even have the material increases. So all things you got to think about if you're building a building today, or you're renovating, and there's a lot of additional costs you're going to incur that you wouldn't have 2 years ago.
Bill, have you seen a moderation of any supply costs over this last year?
Yeah, absolutely. At one point, you look at wood. Wood was up 30, 40% at times, and that's kind of came down and moderated close to where it was, pre-pandemic. So again, it's moving, but overall, that's been pretty good. Steel, same thing. But then you got the equipment, everything else, all the other costs are up, labor costs are up.
You probably don't see a reduction in labor costs coming right now.
No. In fact, there's such a demand. Labor costs went up. I think I was reading nationally. I mean, construction labor was the highest increase nationally at 6%.
So what we saw in banking with a lot of our clients who support the construction market was to try and be competitive. They were keeping their labor rates lower while they're trying to absorb those supply chain costs. And then they started losing talented staff. And so then they went and started having to pay market price or slightly above market price to rebuild that staff. And so overall, the cost structure inside a lot of the subcontractors are really higher than they were even a year ago now. So I think when you're putting out for bid, you're going to find that that component of your cost is going to be significantly higher than what it was even a year ago when you're bidding out projects. That's what we're seeing from our subcontractors when we're talking about their pricing now and how their bidding work.
Josh, do you have anything to add on the topic? They stole it. Good, perfect. No problem. We'll go into topic number 4, which is vacancy rates. And vacancy rate is one of the biggest determining factors on how the commercial real estate market is going, of how much is available out there at that time. Here's a study that was done with information we put together with National Association of Realtors, HUD, Cushman & Wakefield, and Commercial Edge. And what we did is we did a comparison of how is Fort Wayne and Metro doing comparison to the national market. And right now, Fort Wayne is definitely towards the top. It's exciting to see office, 7.4% vacancy rate. Retail has seen a big drop. Usually it was in the double-figure numbers, and it's progressively come down. Industrial, 3.6%, and multifamily at 3.7%. Multifamily, many of them you're seeing growing in new apartments that are popping up on a regular basis. And one of the exciting things is there's waiting lists on a lot of them, and there's just more and more growth and more push. Downtown, we're seeing them specifically, that atmosphere. Millennials, it's become more of a popular trend, and we're seeing more and more of that. And then where we're going with financing and building, it's still going well in that end too, but there's a push of more and more apartment users, which is exciting. Market rent growth, again, we're in a good position there. Multifamily, that's again increasing quite a bit. And one of the biggest surprises that we're seeing is industrial, 7.7% increase in the rent. And that is one that the national market is even higher because of that need for it. And as I've said, e-commerce has been a big part of that in needing more and more industrial warehouse space. And restructuring of the type of building. You need larger buildings. You need higher ceiling heights so you can put racks in. You need more and more docks put in. And so that's been a big alter of that. But then we'll also get into market rent. One of the most interesting things we found in doing our research, right now, office in Fort Wayne, $17 a square foot average from what we're seeing on the Class A, B, C combined, but national, $38.06 a square foot. That's when we're bringing in these big city markets and what rent is coming into place in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. I think we researched and found that there's even somewhere in California, it was $170 a square foot for an area. So that's what alters that and makes that so high. But retail, $22 a square foot, and we're at 13 here in Fort Wayne. Industrial is at $5 a square foot, and that's grown. And then also multifamily. So one of the good things in going back to what we had on Rocket Mortgages, and it's pretty well known, Fort Wayne is one of the most affordable cities to live in and be in. And so with that, that's definitely helped on where attraction is to businesses coming to town and the affordability for it. So going back, anybody else want to share and jump in? Vacancy rates, supply and demand and how that's been in effect, construction changes. Anybody else want to tap in? Some comments on that?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Well, on the retail side, we've seen just a lot of interest from different retail brands that don't have a presence in our market yet. And so that goes hand in glove with a growing population base and younger demographics and the retention or attraction of those post-college students and higher income folks that are choosing to stay here as well. Office is stabilizing. I think one of the things, I don't know, you probably saw in the news earlier this week, Disney recently announced they're mandatory in the office 4 days a week, right? So you're seeing these headlines every week. There's a website that tracks all of the major corporations' policies in terms of in-office, hybrid, totally remote. There's only a handful of companies that have remained totally remote. Most are going to some sort of hybrid model with the expectation that you are in office, which means you've got to have proximity and you've got to maintain a footprint. I think Fort Wayne has been in a lucky position in that way, and having new product that's coming online has allowed us to remain competitive, the retention of Do It Best headquarters. You look at the national lease rates for office, and we're competitive. We've been very competitive for IT projects in the last several years because they love the pipeline of talent coming from our higher education institutions. They can get great office product and that dynamic quality of life Industrial continues to just be a challenge in terms of supply, and we're working on that. But we've got great spec building programs throughout the county, and those have really helped us respond to opportunities.
Move on to the next one. Commercial real estate activity that we have seen, and I want to elaborate on the different submarkets. So what submarkets, as in retail, office, industrial, multifamily, will see the most activity in 2023? Bill, do you want to lead us off from what you've seen on construction projects, what you guys are working on to see growth and pickup for coming year, for this year?
I think looking at all those, industrial absolutely is probably the biggest moving into 2023 and beyond, especially for Northeast Indiana. I always look at what projects we have going on, what we have in the pipeline, and although we have a mix of projects, industrial seems to be the bigger mix, and just nationally, if you read the statistics, that's basically what they're saying. From an office perspective, I think, Ellen, you basically hit on that, but ourselves, we looked at that as a company when we're building a new headquarters right now. Do we really build that big? We really, talking to the people in our own office and our own employees, what we're hearing is people want to get back out. COVID was a bad thing, but then it's a good thing too, because there's a lot we've learned from it. People don't want to sit at home. They want that interaction with other people. So we felt like, hey, we need to build this thing for people being back in the office. And I think a lot of people, like you said, Disney, Tesla, all those people are requiring people to come back to the office because that's where the culture is. That's what makes a company good or bad. So that's pretty big. And then warehousing, I think in Fort Wayne, I mean, even if you build at these rates, we need it. They need it nationally. You can't build any cheaper than you can build in Fort Wayne, is the way I feel, compared to our competition. So if you're going to build something, I think it's, a 3% in this area, maybe vacancy rate even on warehousing. So that always works. You build a spec building, it could be a warehouse, it could be a industrial building. Like I said, a lot of industrial coming, and they're going to need space. I look at healthcare. Healthcare, what's healthcare going to do? I think it's continue to grow, not at a rapid pace. I think it has over the past year or two. But with that, you got telehealth, which is going to slow some of these office visits down, so less bricks and mortar. But you also have the aging population. So we're going to need more beds in the hospital for the people that are aging, as well as more nursing homes and senior care. On the education front, we talked about all the great universities here in Fort Wayne and beyond, but I can tell you right now, some of my biggest projects this year will be at the universities. We're doing a huge healthcare for the health sciences at Tryon University. We'll be starting over by Parkview, doing a media communications and an entrepreneurial studies building at Taylor University. We're going to be building a residence hall here at Indiana Tech. So it's pretty broad of what's happening in education. Education is going to continue to change. It's crazy with metaverse and everything else with biotech. The universities that are cutting edge are going to be on top of things, and we have those universities real close to us, so we're very fortunate in that regard. Transportation, I look at the airport. The airport here keeps growing, and it's going to continue to grow. What a lot of these aging populations is doing, they're traveling. Couldn't travel for a long time, it's crazy now. All kinds of problems with travel. Hopefully they get that straightened out, but ultimately continue with the airport and federal projects, as well as transportation as it relates to rail and just bridges and such. So there's that public side and federal side is going to continue to grow over the next couple of years. It took a big downturn basically when COVID started. A lot of that stuff went away. So that's coming back. I would say lodging. I look at lodging, and that really kind of hit bottom with COVID when everything was shut down. And like I said, with all these people wanting to travel again, going to need more hotels, motels, what have you. And that's going to continue to grow. Now, what's residential going to do? With the interest rates where it's at, I think, we see it already on the housing market, single-family housing, but I think with multifamily housing, in our area for sure, that is a big thing going on right now. Lots of projects coming down the pipeline for that. They need to be a little bit cheaper to rent for the younger crowd. Obviously, with the interest rates and such, they can't afford to maybe purchase a house like they could before. So multifamily is going to be really big, I think, over the next couple of years, especially with all the manufacturing and the growth that we have in these different industrial markets. Those people need a place to stay, and I think that'll continue to grow.
What we see right now in our shop is two different approaches. The local governments prefer multifamily right now in Northeast and Northwest Ohio because they have a shortage of rental properties for their employees to be able to support the employers in the markets that they're serving. So I think if you were to ask Noble County, DeKalb County, even Allen County, we need more apartments to be able to handle the growth of the population who are in their 20s and 30s who want to live in that space. And unfortunately, there's just not a lot of land available that can be zoned appropriately to do that right now. So there's a difference between a need and a want. The real need is not going to be able to be fulfilled right now because they just can't get enough land to do it. So that's one item that we're seeing quite a bit of. The projects that are happening in 23, we all know are planned, start planning in 21 and 22. And so this is what's happening in 23 is kind of baked out what was forecasted in 21 and 22 by developers and business owners. The business owners right now in 23 are pausing. They just want to see what's going to happen with rates, with if there's going to be a recession coming, which is going to drop their company's revenue needs and their planned expansion needs. We're having people talk about it, but they're really putting on pause until they see the impact of a potential recession. They're just doing the wise thing, which any business owner would do, which is try to take back and reflect. Furthermore, they're pushing some of their capacity down to other suppliers. So before they do that expansion, they're saying we're going to push some of this capacity down to a tier 3 or a tier 4 producer where it's overflow work for them. Basically, they're going to kind of push that down until they know there's some stability in their income source. But I will say, though, that government's going to keep pushing for multifamily in all of the counties in Northeast Indiana and Northwest Ohio. They're going to try and find ways to bring developers in and incent them to do multifamily. So if you enjoy that space, you're going to have probably one of the challenges, which I'll talk about at the end of my challenges, the cap rates rising in that space is real. So it's just gone up a little bit from as low as, 4% maybe, Josh? And now it's going to be up in that 6-7% range. So it's going to be more difficult, possibly. The rental rates on apartment buildings in our area are strong, but regionally they're dropping a little bit. So those are kind of competing items in that space, but if you really want to be in multifamily, this is the time to try and work and partner with local governments to do that. They'll be supportive.
Ellen, do you want to share, you were telling me about the Inflation Reduction Act and then kind of go into a little bit of what you've been seeing, large-scale projects and such going on in the area?
Sure. So the Inflation Reduction Act is a bill that is aimed at lowering the monthly expenditures of the average American. So there's a lot in there related to things like prescription drugs and areas like utility bills. On the utility side, a big push towards renewables and some things that can impact not just building owners, but also long-term leaseholders as well. There's credits for, they're extending credits for things like purchasing an electric vehicle. They've introduced new credits for buying used electric vehicles. There's also credits and cash benefits available to consumers that are looking to put in solar on their properties. And one of the new things is to incentivize upgrades and energy efficient investments in commercial properties. There's an incentive of, I think it's $1 per square foot for commercial building owners and long-term leaseholders there. And that's a new incentive that's in there. So there's a lot in there. We're digging into it at Greater Fort Wayne and plan to host an event to kind of demystify it and pull out some of those Easter eggs in there that we can take advantage of. And then in terms of some of the projects that we're seeing, because of these changes, both on the private sector side and the federal sector side, and I mentioned this before, we're just seeing project leads that are supersized, quite frankly. You think of the Intel project that was announced in Columbus. You think about the Stellantis project announced in Kokomo and others. As automakers shift to electric, as there's increasing demand for renewable energy, these just require much different have much different site requirements in terms of the site size and the utility demands. So we're working on that in Allen County, but it has been a sea change in 2022.
Ellen, have you seen a certain area of Northeast Indiana that's had more of a push from these new employers coming in? I know the airport area is big, along US 30. Has there been anything that's been the main attraction of businesses coming in, what area they want to be in?
I would say all of the above. One of the great things that I think we do really well from an economic development standpoint is the collaboration across our government units. The city and county just updated their comprehensive land use plan, all in Allen. And at the same time, we worked on an updated economic development strategy for the community called Allen County Together. Those plans work in coordination with each other in terms of identifying the land use needs for residential to support our growing labor force, but also areas so that we can invest in additional sites for commercial and industrial development. Every area of the county kind of has its own niche. And so in Airport Expressway, you see that it's advanced manufacturing with some of those headquarters operations. It's not heavy industrial. We have areas zoned for heavier industrial. I would say the city of New Haven is like kind of a hot spot for foreign direct investment. You see some great companies in New Haven that are doing a lot of R&D in companies like Trelleborg that you might not realize is happening when you drive by. Obviously, US 30 is seeing a lot of activity, and NDOT is making some investments there.
Okay. And Josh, from a conversation we had, you were saying how, from the economic standpoint, the long term on commercial real estate, you've seen always that supply demand, always that interest in it, pretty consistent. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Just some general observations. The economy as a whole over the last 70 years or so has expanded at about 3% annually on average. Granted, we've had some nasty recessions. But again, assuming we have long-term, growth that's relatively consistent, if you have, limited supply and increasing demand over a longer period of time, that would suggest that prices should be, there should be a general appreciation in prices. Again, with the understanding that there could be, short-term, drops, that are more cyclical.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think one of the biggest surprises from my end was post-pandemic and how things have evolved in such a positive manner since then. Specifically in office, we're hearing about a lot of companies that are no longer using office, which there are some, but I think it's a lot less than what might be perceived. Some of the larger companies you hear of, like Lincoln, that might be coming up, but I think keeping that accountability of the employees in hand, office has still been strong from that end. And as I elaborated on, industrial and retail are still in a really good place, and I think we'll see that consistent in the future. So going into the last topic, as we're getting down on time, as closure, going into 2023, what do you see as one main concern, and what do you see as a positive outlook for this year? We'll start off with Josh on that.
Okay. So let's start off with some good news. So price increases are slowing down. Prices are not going down, but the rate of increase is slowing a little bit, which is good news. I believe some of my colleagues mentioned that lumber prices and steel prices are kind of moderating a little bit. That's some good news, especially in the commercial real estate area. Areas to look for, I would watch labor markets. Again, there still seems to be even though we have more workers available, do they have the right skill sets? That's a huge challenge right there. And the other area where we simply don't know is the business cycle. We mentioned the yield curve. I was taking a look at some data from the Fed, and based on the spread between the 90-day and the 10-year treasuries, there's probably greater than a 50% chance of a recession next 12 to 18 months. So that's not good news. Does that mean one will happen? Not necessarily, but there's, again, a greater probability. I mean, I think common sense would kind of suggest that possibility anyways, but the models also support that possibility. So that's probably one of the biggest things to watch out for.
If I had a concern for 2023, it would be small business formation. Will, you were talking about just the uncertainty over the next 2 years and banks wanting to remove that speculative nature of lending. And then also when you look at the low vacancy rates and the pressure that's putting on rents, think about what it takes, to enter the market if you're an entrepreneur and you haven't done this before. Darren Rainier's here with the Northeast Indiana Community Development Corporation, which is a partner with our banking community to try to figure it out when someone is denied a traditional bank loan or they're only approved at a certain amount. How do we get them over the finish line? There's something we took a look at in our Allen County Together plan was community development finance institutions, CDFI lending. That patient capital that can partner with traditional banks for people that maybe don't have all the collateral, don't have the tax information lined up, don't have those things. How do we as a community support that small business formation? We took a trip to Louisville several years ago and saw some really exciting things happening in their neighborhoods. And the common theme there was their banking community, which I think we've got a stronger banking community here in terms of the relationships and how our banks partner and work together to get things done. But they have several CDFIs that are working on neighborhood issues, working on promoting entrepreneurship and small business formation. And so we came back, worked with the City of Fort Wayne and the Community Foundation to understand our CDFI lending environment. And we're at about 30% of the national average per capita. So that's something that we really need to figure out and get our arms around. We've got some great partners like Darren's group at the CDC and Brightpoint. But we've got some additional needs in the market that we've got to figure out how to serve so that we are growing that next generation of businesses.
I think the overwhelming concern for most of us in business is the potential recession and how deep it's going to go and how long it's going to last. And how high are interest rates going to be, that blunt instrument that the Federal Reserve is going to use, how high are they going to go? Because that's going to impact many things if you're a real estate developer, real estate investor, not the least of which is the value of your property if you try to divest yourself of that or acquire more. The cap rates right now are not reflective of the true NOI that a property is throwing off. It's reflective of the impact of the cost of money, right? And so we all have a lot of terrific metrics we saw earlier regarding vacancy, rental rates, strong properties, strong developers. And the recession, though, frankly, is going to drive rates up, which if you had to escape a project, you might find that the value of that is not going to match what the NOI shows. You could have a NOI when you bought it that you've actually increased, but because the cost of money going up, the way the cap rate's calculated, you're going to find it's not going to be as valuable. So that's one concern that a recession or planning for a recession is going to have if I were a developer and have a portfolio of assets is what is its true value right now if I had to liquidate it and get out of it. The positives, though, are the things I mentioned earlier. Our banks in general, Ellen is right. Every bank in our marketplace, and I mean that sincerely, every bank in our marketplace that all of you have relationships or work for, they're strong balance sheets, strong capital positions. We're very blessed in our community right now to not have people teetering any way or the other as we're heading into a recession or a potential recession. So you have a strong financial position right there as a partners. Furthermore, our manufacturers, distributors, medical supply folks, even our developers, very strong positions in equity and liquidity right now. The balance sheets of our clients, and I'm sure across every asset class, are very good right now, if not as good as they've ever been. So to weather a recession, the positive really in my mind is we're about as strong as we could ever be. Strong capital positions in the business world and strong capital positions in the bank world, and now we're just going to try and play it all out. And I do foresee that today, Thursday, we have our CPI report coming out here at 9:30. So I'll be on bated breath waiting for that in the banking community to see what's that going to do to our rates. But as those things moderate to what Dr. Long was saying and come into line, you'll find rates starting to relax a little bit, possibly. But we're in a position right now in Fort Wayne, the banking community and the business community, we're going to weather it just fine. I don't think it's going to be a deep, long recession. I don't know if Dr. Long feels the same, but I don't feel it's going to be deep and long. I don't feel that way from the data I'm looking at from our economists. And so I think we'll be just fine. It's just going to be this pause in 23 and possibly through 24, a little bit of 24, or it's just going to feel different. Cost of money might be a little bit higher. Vacancies might go up a little bit. But we have a really good business community that's going to survive it all just fine. I truly believe that.
On the negative side, really, it's just the skilled trades. Let's educate these people. Let's bring up people because we need them in the future here. As things may slow down, we need to continue to educate and train our workforce for the skilled trades. But on the other side, we have great leadership in Fort Wayne. Great leaders, great entrepreneur minds, and that's going to set us apart in Northeast Indiana. It really is. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, look at the state. I mean, look at the local government, all the different incentives that are out there. There's always something they're coming up with to make it simpler or easier to make a project happen. And that's the kind of leadership we have. And I don't see, even with a major recession, I don't see things slowing down very long in Fort Wayne or surrounding area.
Well, thank you. You know, from the commercial real estate standpoint, I think there's going to be an influx on leasing, and we might see more of that in comparison to the sales. But capitalization rates, I can see cap rates seeing an increase as that as well with the interest rates because of those increasing. Cap rates need to increase. But as we talked about, you know, the activity that we're going to have in Fort Wayne, we're already in a position of one of the best in the entire United States with where our ranking was, with where our statistics were. And, you know, a couple things to add. Study done by National Apartment Association, 4.3 million units will be added by 2035. And there is strong growth specifically in Northeast Indiana with that because Zimmerman and Volk Associates did a study for Allen County, 18,255 more households needed in the next 5 years because of that growth. So, Lonnie Norris, you like hearing that, don't you? But with it, the 3 hospitals in the market, they're growing too. We're seeing more and more of those come up, more and more land acquisitions that they are doing to grow and grow. And then industrial spec buildings are still coming into place. We've got a new one that we're marketing, just about to put on the market up in Auburn, 50,000 square feet. I know there's some by the airport, and there's just a large need for that. So I think from the crystal ball standpoint, some observations made as we close. Northeast Indiana is stronger than the national market, and we're in a very good community from that end. There's going to be adapting and movements to the market that we'll see. Financing, we'll see great movement by year end. As it's where it's at now, we're going to see that positive over time. Developments and construction will continue. Might be some lapse on time with some of them, but overall, they're going to continue, and we're going to see consistency there. Industrial, multifamily, medical, and even retail. I think we're going to still see some strength. So as we close, I know we're getting tight on time. Thank you again. Thank the panelists. We appreciate them coming and sharing, spending the time. I want to thank you to Indiana Tech, Greater Fort Wayne, Inc., Michael Kinder and Sons, and Community State Bank for being a part of this with the panelists. And I want to say thank you to my team at Allied Commercial, Craig Kozlowski, our VP of Asset Management and Principal, leading our property management and asset management. Tim Binkley, Vice President of Operations. Jackie Todd, Vice President of Residential Management and Multifamily. Parker Braun, broker, and Caleb Hames doing administrative and marketing. So, there we go. Thank you very much. Have a great day.